Over the past few months, I've been to Brazil to meet drug gangs. I've been to New Zealand to meet Maori gangs. I've been to Los Angeles to meet neo-Nazi gangs. Now I've come to a place that's not quite so exotic. However, the gangs are just as dangerous, just as violent. I've come to my hometown. I've come to London.
It's one of the world's great cities, the largest and wealthiest city in Western Europe, with the most powerful financial centre in the world. On the surface, it looks healthy, prosperous, safe. But London has some of the highest crime rates in Western Europe. I've set off on a journey to discover what happens in London's underbelly. It's violent street robberies, illegal drug deals, armed robberies, prostitution, murders. A wide range of serious crimes carried out by criminal gangs operating in London. According to police, there are about 200 active gangs in London. My journey will take me to far-flung corners of this city to see how and where they operate. It's a journey that will show how London's gangland has developed from local gangs ruling their patch through fear to cosmopolitan international crime networks. Today's criminal enterprises hit the UK for about £20 billion a year. How did London's gangland mushroom into these vast money-making organisations? Where did they spring from?
I grew up with lots of tales of how the gangsters used to run the East End, the Crays, the Richardsons and the gentleman villains that existed in the 60s and the 50s. Certain codes that they lived by, a code of silence, a code of respect, etc. I'm convinced that doesn't exist anymore. The gangs that are out there and the crime syndicates are highly organised, they cross borders, are incredibly ruthless and are highly dangerous. If those rules ever did exist, they just don't exist anymore.
In the 1950s and 60s, gangs had a hierarchical structure, often centred around close-knit family units operating in a small geographical area such as the East End and its infamous Cray twins. To see how that changed, I've enlisted the help of two men to guide me through the evolution of London's gangs. The first is Terry Smith, a former gang boss who operated in and around London in the 1970s and early 80s. His speciality was armed robbery. In 1983, he was given a 15-year sentence for robbing a Brinks Mat security van.
It was all based around close-knit family groups that are very loyal and trustworthy to each other, and that way we could reign far longer as professional armed robbers than you would have done if you'd have been a bit freelance. You start off, go up to the security guard and just take the bag or the box off him, and the first getaway car, then change over car, then you're home. Then the next stage up would be a demand, what we call a demander. You get the guard and take him back to the chute, and you put a gun to his head and basically say, like, do as you're told, chuck it all out, otherwise you're going to get it. And then the next stage after that would be stopping security vans on public roads, ramming them back and front. And then if you got inside the van, drove it away, and at that time in the 1980s, they didn't have safes inside the vans, so you could come away with a 500, you know, £700,000 if you're lucky. I view my trade as a manipulation of fear and terror, and I do it with a gun. That's what I was good at. And when I was speaking to a security guard at the shoot or anywhere, 9.5 times out of 10 he would do as he's told.
But Terry's world was about to change. The mid-80s was the era of the supergrass. Gang insiders who were prepared to betray their gang loyalties to the police and testify against former associates in court. It changed the nature of crime and the gangs who ran it. Going on the pavement, as armed robbery was known, was out of date. There were new kids on the block. My second guide operated at the heart of gangland London for nearly 20 years. He uses an alias and keeps his identity secret.
A lot of armed robbers got caught and got put away down to supergrasses. So people looking at that, us coming up, although we did get involved on the pavement, we knew that there was no future in it. It was a bugs game. We were probably the first generation that pulled out of going on the pavement, moved away from protection as such, and moved into the the drugs game. That's where everyone who was anyone earned their money in the 80s.
Shortly after I was arrested in 1986, the drug phenomenon come into being. When I come home, then I see all these, the generation below me, that was, you know, they put the armed robbers in, they made them prehistoric with the amounts of money they was getting, and it was great to see young fellas driving around in brand new Mercedes and BMWs. I thought, yeah, this is, you know, I'm really pleased for them. It takes a lot of pressure off looking at those who are getting a few quid.
The loyalties and ties that had kept the old firms together went out the window.
We moved into the puff game by actually fucking big drug dealers at the time. So what would happen was we'd find out about their loads when they were coming in, and we'd hijack them. So there we walked away for about 2 hours' work. We had about 1.5 mil. There was no honour among thieves. It was really dog fuck dog. And that's when there was lots of violence. I don't know if you remember, but there was lots of gangland killings in the 80s. One particular dealer just smashed him to bits there, rolled him up in a carpet, carried him out to a van, took him back to one of our boozers, rolled him into the cellar, and then just tortured him until he told us where the money was. Hit with a hammer, then his head held into a bucket of water until he was drowning, then pulled out. Then we put his hands out, and my partner smashed his hands to pieces with a sledgehammer. I mean, the guy was fucked. But to take someone away and put them in a room, tied to a chair, with a cloth over their head, in darkness, knowing that, I mean, this guy was begging us to kill him. He said, I can't stand it anymore, please kill me, please kill me.
New drugs from abroad meant new gangs and an upsurge of violence. The 1990s ushered in the era of the so-called yardies.
Tonight on Thames Reports, American federal agents warn of the threat that London faces from the yardies, the Jamaican gangsters who run the drugs business.
The media latched onto the yardies as a new fearsome threat, but Horace Silver, by now a senior member of one of London's most successful gangs, saw it differently.
So this thing about yardies, it's bullshit. It's a concoction by old Bill to say that there's these black Jamaican gangs, when they're just guys, individuals that are just ripping each other off for bags of crack and stuff like that. I mean, as far as making inroads into organised crime, never, not in any way, shape or form. Low-level sort of crack selling is probably predominantly maybe black crime, I don't know. But behind bringing in the Charlie, the cocaine, and operating right at the top, if you like, the CEOs, yeah, they're white, of course. I mean, when you see these guys get arrested that are so-called yardies, they're busted in a council flat. How many yardies or so-called yardies have been busted in a mansion out in Essex, a £5 million mansion? None.
But my journey is about to reveal that the yardies did leave London's gangland a terrifying legacy. Easy access to guns.
They were the ones who came over and started using an enormous amount of violence against each other and against sort of innocent people as well, in terms of using automatic machine guns and gunning each other down with great viciousness. I think the reason we have so many armed police on the streets of London today is almost purely because of the Yardie influence and the amount of violence that they used when they got here.
In 2004, there were 11,000 gun crimes committed in the UK. Much of it in London, often by young kids associated with street gangs.
I think the main fear that we have from gun crime and the main danger we face from gun crime are the younger, less organised criminal groups who are really pretty chaotic about their lifestyle, and the gun crime is more associated with lower level drug dealing or just as a fashion statement in certain parts of the country.
I set off again to find out who gets hold of these guns and what effect gang-related gun crime has on our streets.
This argument now.
A brand new extreme travel series starts with Ian Wright's Excellent Adventure. Thursday at 9, Sky 1.
I'm on my way to a part of southwest London which has suffered from gun crime more than most.
We're on the way to Brixton, a place infamous obviously for the riots that happened in the 80s and for the amount of gun crime that goes on there and the gang activity that happens there. We're going to hopefully meet some people that are going to tell us exactly what's going on there.
The man I'm meeting knows what's happening at grassroots level. He spent 8 years in prison for possession of a MAC-10 submachine gun.
We're going to meet a guy called Wayne who runs a charity organisation called Straight Aims which helps kids on the streets, but used to be a member of the gang. Looking for a guy called Wayne?
I mean, I grew up in Brixton, I grew up hard. You know what I mean? There's a lot of similarities to the way I grew up than the way they grew up. I couldn't go until a neurologist about neurology because I don't know nothing about it. What I do know about is growing up on the streets. Do you know what I mean? So I go in there and I say to them, look, at the end of the day, I've done what you're doing. Do you know what I mean? And this is how it ultimately ends up. It ends up either a life sentence in prison or in the graveyard. And that's the reality of it.
How many of your friends have you lost then?
About 15 in total. There's probably more.
But is that due to gun crime as well?
Yeah, all of them.
All of them?
Yeah.
So you used to run with the gang, didn't you? Ran with the posse, didn't you not?
It started with I won't say started, but there was a posse called the Raiders posse. Was in existence at that time. Then the Wackett posse came on after that. Then Angman, then the 28s, and the rest is history.
And then it progresses.
Yeah, it progresses from there. When you're in a gang, it's like a family. Whereas, you know, there's a lot of breakdown in actual family values within the home, and they find comfort, basically, in getting involved in gangs or whatever.
The violence that goes along with it, though, mate, I mean, is that attractive? Is that what's attractive for some people? Is it the kudos, the respect you get?
Yeah, well, it is, because at the end of the day, I've always said this, guns are power, and that's prevalent the world over. I mean, the armies with the biggest guns, they got the biggest talk in the world, and that transcends onto the streets. I mean, the guys who got the biggest guns in their era, they get the most respect.
It's not about how big you are, then, it's how many guns you've got.
It's who's got yeah, you know what I mean, and willing to use them, basically.
Gun crime has nearly doubled in and around Brixton in the past year. There were 162 shootings in 2004 that left 18 people dead. Horrific statistics with horrific stories.
We've had our children ripped away from us, and, you know, we have two ways to go. We can either lay down and give up, or we can fight.
They wanted his car keys, and he said, no, I'm not giving you. And one of them shouted, shoot him. Took his mobile phone, took his chain, took his wallet.
It's 4 words I'll never forget. Michelle Leon's been shot. I could tell that his heart had gone into shock, so I started to give him CPR.
The car that she was driving was blasted with a revolver, semi-automatic revolver, and she died on scene.
And then he died at 9:30 approximately in St Thomas's Hospital. We just had to watch him die.
He died at 3 a.m. on Sunday at King's College Hospital.
When they've shot people and they're on the ground and they're injured, that they'll say, blaze him, finish him off.
Damon was shot on the 29th of July outside Brand's nightclub in Holborn. But you cannot, because we're not supposed to bury our children. It's supposed to be the other way around. They take away the gun and they're cowards.
And the police will tell you when they're in the police station, they are blubbering idiots. They are bawling.
The callousness with which people carry out these dastardly acts, it's gruesome.
And they're shopping, and you just pick up something, and it reminds you of your child, and right in the middle of the store, tears are rolling down. The pain is horrendous.
If we want to build up a society that we want our children, our young people to be happy, then we need to all stand up and say no to gun crime. It has to stop.
I'd heard the terrible stories from some of the victims' families. Now I want to get to the root of the problem. I want to meet some of those accused of gang-related gun crime. One of the groups that has hit the headlines for the wrong reasons is a local gang that goes by the initials PDC.
Well, the most notorious gang I've heard of recently are the PDC, which is poverty-driven children. And they go about their business by instilling fear And I hear now that they're even starting to recruit or trying to convert kids from schools now and trying to create gang members from there. They can commit these horrid acts of violence and perhaps get away with it even. Okay, mothers will grieve, mothers will weep tears, families will cry. But at the end of the day, they feel sure that people from the black community won't talk because they are so much in fear. And I have to say, if that is the case, we are in fear.
I meet some of the PDC at a Brixton recording studio, where they are trying to put their energy into music rather than crime.
Yeah. Life of a young black male. It's hard, you know it's hard. Yeah. Stuck out on the streets. Every day in, day out.
But no, this is a true story. If we came here right now, yeah, and I took out a kilo of crack and a kilo of brown, it would be good for your show, innit? And we brought out 15 guns and said, yeah, if anyone comes around here, everyone would be going mad about it, hype like,
But that's not real.
Well, that's what I want to hear. What is the reality? What is the reality? What is the reality?
The reality is trying to get this music get this music cracking, create jobs, open up community centres and make jobs for our people. Yeah? That's what I'm saying. The future.
Guys, all right, there's obviously a lot of hype written about it, and there's obviously a lot of rubbish written about it, but it is true that people get shot here, isn't it? That does happen, doesn't it? That's not.
It don't mean to say it's always. It don't mean to say it's us.
Didn't say it was you. No, but it happens here, doesn't it?
Yeah, but they're trying to put it across
the biggest everywhere people that lit people over, yeah, and they shoot man down are the American army, innit? But no one don't really cuss them, innit? They're in Iraq killing innocent people.
No, forget about that, man. Somebody got shot near my house by the police. He got shot 5 times in the face.
Look how they lick out my man's head back in Stockholm tube station. They hold him down
He dropped on the floor
in his head back.
And they said, we're criminals.
And we're
He
criminals.
dropped on the floor and they shot him in the face.
But police can run down people with guns in their hand like that.
Stop! So imagine that.
Freeze, hold them down,
outside
and then you
here
can't
right
get it
now
back.
with all the nonsense they've put across about us, yeah? I could be standing out here right now and see a police car pull up. Do you think I'm gonna want them to stop me and I know they're shooting people?
Will they identify you as the crew though? Will they know?
They're around. They've got their own crew. They're around here. That's what I'm saying. They're around here more than us.
Yeah, they're gangbangers. They're gangbangers.
They're around here more than us.
Police are the biggest gang around.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. They're around here more than anybody.
What are the things that you say you share in common then that bond you together?
Losing people that was close to us. True stories. I'm trying to say.
Well, how does that happen, mate?
They get shot.
They get shot. And let's be honest, this area is got a lot of gun crime, isn't it?
That's what they're saying.
How did the guns get here though?
But you asked a question. I don't know. Where did they come from? There are a lot of them about though. A lot of people say that if you get involved in crime in this area, you're probably going to get involved with guns, and if you get involved with guns, you're probably going to end up either in prison or dead. I mean, you guys are aware of that, aren't you?
True stories.
Yeah. Do you know what I mean?
Look at the other situation here. What is there really to do around it? There's no community centre. The community centre's closed.
The kids we take one step forward, they're pushing us 2 steps back.
Tuesday.
Media, society, like the system, innit?
System.
In this community, if you slip, you're losing your life.
Yeah.
So you get immune to a lot of things in the system. You get immune to the police. You know, why are you going to worry about getting 10 years when, so someone can take your life and your family are turning a visit in your grave? So people get immune to a lot of things in the system. So you don't really worry about, say, crime and whatever. You don't want to do crime. No one wants to do crime. If anyone stands up here and says they want to do crime, because if there's an alternative, everyone will be doing it. But a lot of our parents have been working for 30 years, 40 years, and they're still struggling.
It's like, for you to do certain things in a certain way, you got to live a certain way around it. You know what I'm trying to say?
Not really, I don't understand.
Oh, well, that's why we make music.
There's a lot of stuff you can get to out here. But, you get me?
Day-to-day life.
Day-to-day life, bro.
But when you say other stuff, what do you mean by that?
There's all kinds of stuff I don't really want to talk about on camera and that, but you're fed up with negativity. 25 years of negativity ain't good. That's what I'm saying.
We need progress now.
I need progress.
No
now.
more regrets. Progress.
No one don't like living in squalor and that. Everyone likes to live comfortable, innit? I want a piece of the cake as well. And my brothers, we want in.
The guys weren't particularly forthcoming And a lot of what they said, I've actually heard before. I've heard it in Brazil. I've heard it in New Zealand. The powers that be are responsible for the situation that they find themselves in, and I've heard it in London.
From what they told me, it felt as though it wouldn't take much to keep those kids away from crime. But I know there are others out there, more serious customers, whose activities have more dangerous implications for society and who are proving much harder to track down. One such man was Recep Yilmaz. He was targeted by police because he was the suspected linchpin of a drug smuggling network bringing in hundreds of kilograms of heroin. His organisation, mainly composed of Turks from North London, was the very model of a modern criminal gang.
It was a small network of ethnically homogenous group consisting of some close confidants. He had trusted people working for him who did his jobs, and he wouldn't allow other people from other networks necessarily into that inner sanctum just because he couldn't trust them.
Police acting on a tip-off put Yilmaz under surveillance. But as I watched the footage, the difficulties of cracking this sort of network became clear.
They're very fluid. It is difficult to identify, unlike the preconceptions of the mafia style, which to some extent still exist. They tend to move areas, and it is difficult to work out who is working for who very often. And when you start working on a group, it takes you into other people and takes you into other groups. What you can see here is Yilmaz and David Powell having one of their meets in a public car park, which was a venue of choice really for their criminality. There's a handover, there's something that goes into the boot of the vehicle. It was our claim that that was either part of or all of £350,000 in cash.
Police began to close in on his network. I watched the arrest of some of Yilmaz's associates and the seizure of 70 kilograms of heroin, all caught on camera.
We only arrested the people shown, which are Mert Goran, Sean Harrison and David Powell. Harrison and Powell had arranged the transport into the UK using a legit haulier who they'd paid off, brought the consignment in and were handing it over to Mert Goran, and those drugs were then going to be moved elsewhere. Shortly after the final seizure of heroin, we had intelligence that a group were bringing in a consignment of cannabis, which may or may not have involved Yilmaz. That cannabis was taken in a scrap metal lorry, brought in up to Rotherham, where we took the consignment out and seized 2 tons.
Police then moved in on Yilmaz.
There was no evidence that he used violence, although when he had a deal that went wrong, he thought he'd been ripped off, and he did make comments that suggested that he was going to look to have the person done, whatever that means. He didn't want to think that we were working on him, and although people kept getting arrested near to him, he just carried on, and he, on one occasion, just said, well, we need to get back to business to cover our loss. And that was the nature of the man. He was somewhat blind to the fact that there was a lot of police activity, and ultimately it led to his arrest.
In total, 130 kilograms of heroin and 2 tons of cannabis resin was seized with a street value of £18 million. It brought Yilmaz and his gang associates a multi-million-pound lifestyle.
Very little was actually in his name of what he did own. He drove a £70,000 Mercedes. He'd bought the house that they lived in his son's name for cash. He owned other properties, both in the UK and abroad, but yet had no identifiable income at all. It was a business to him, and he'd been very successful at it and had an extremely good lifestyle.
Yilmaz's criminality cost him a 30-year prison sentence, and his network was disbanded. Police hope that they have got one of the bigger fish in the heroin trade. That doesn't stop smaller networks moving into the business.
I don't think there are many Recep Yilmazes around. There are some, and they are still out there, and they are bringing in large quantities of heroin.
I'd seen an example of a secretive drug smuggling ring, but now I want to find out about a more public sort of crime, the speciality of white gangs, the smash and grab heist.
Yeah, the majority of crime in the UK, regardless of where you are, is going to be committed by indigenous, white, working class blokes. And they have always been the backbone of gangland, and they always will be.
It's the 7th of November 2000. A JCB sets off from an industrial estate in South London and joins the morning rush hour. A day like any other, except this is the first move in an attempt to carry out Britain's most audacious robbery. The theft of £300 million worth of diamonds from the Millennium Dome, including arguably the most perfect large diamond in the world, the Millennium Star. What the gang didn't know is that the police were onto them, tracking the JCB digger into the Dome complex, through the security gates and into the area where the diamonds were housed. They then watched the gang try and break into the case to steal fake diamonds. The police had replaced the real ones earlier. The police then made their move. 5 men were arrested, including the getaway driver in his speedboat on the Thames. They all got long-term prison sentences. Their trappings may have been in the style of traditional gangs, but the scale of their ambitions went much further than their predecessors.
The more we travel on this programme, the further we go, the more I'm beginning to realise that things have changed dramatically. There's so much money involved, there's so much greed, there's so much more violence. People can travel so much easier these days. They move from continent to continent, from country to country.
And as I'm about to discover, it is other sorts of cross-border crime that pose a new and terrifying threat to our capital city. London is made up of hundreds of different ethnic communities. It's a strength in this most cosmopolitan of cities, but it brings its own problems.
I think we've certainly seen cases where people from particular countries, if they've a member of a particular political organisation or maybe even a former terrorist organisation, who come into the UK and maintain some of the squabbles and the difficulties which occurred back in the host countries. These old squabbles manifest themselves in terms of violence on the streets of the UK.
This is a religious ceremony in the heart of one of London's many ethnic communities. It's a Hindu temple near Wembley in North London, a place of worship for London's Tamil community, many of them refugees from Sri Lanka's bloody civil war between government forces and rebel Tamil tigers. But the rivalries at home didn't end when they arrived in London.
This is a poster notifying the community that a sports event has been cancelled. When they have their kind of local community events, these gangs turn up, and because of previous fights, massive fights apparently between these gangs involving weapons, fists, etc., they've cancelled it. The police won't let them have any more meetings of this nature because of the violence that occurs out there.
This is what happened recently in this small corner of London. Police, acting on a tip-off, raided this normal house in a normal street. They arrested several Tamil gang members and came out with bagfuls of evidence. I meet up with the local business leader who is worried about the effect of the gangs on the 100,000-strong Tamil community.
So far, as far as I know, about 4 murders have taken place in this area. And they threaten people. They don't have any values whatsoever. They are totally detached from the mainstream Tamils. And they cause enough harm to the Tamil people and the businesses here.
Can you give me some examples of what's happened lately?
That restaurant some youngsters went there, had dinner. They had an argument over a woman problem and £200 debt. And one chap was pulled out. He was beaten, bundled into a car.
These are gang members that did this?
The gang members. He was also part of the gang members. Possibly he's a weaker member. And he was taken to Roe Green Park. He was killed. He was burnt alive.
They set fire to him?
Yes, he died. Yeah.
In Sri Lanka, what would happen to them there?
The police is basically very harsh. They are rough. You see, if they try to be funny, they'll get beaten, you see, by the police. So they are scared of the police. They're scared of the police. Here it is liberal. They can say anything they want. They are absolutely aggressive. They don't care about the police.
There are an estimated 40 Tamil gangs in London, with names like the Wembley Boys and the Walthamstow Boys. But in this close-knit community, it's hard to make contact with either gang members or their victims.
Come to a part of East London to meet a man who's basically works as a liaison between the Tamil community in East London and the police. Going to try and find out whether he's willing to tell us a bit about how these gangs operate and how they affect the local community.
Do the people who are the victims of these gangs, do they find it hard to go to the police?
That's the main reason. That's the main reason they are coming to us, because they are for some other reason they are unable to speak to the police because they are scared. And also,
what do you mean? They would be beaten up if they talked to us?
Beaten up or kidnapped or something like that.
Kidnapped? So these gangs kidnap people for ransom?
Sometimes, yes. Not ransom. To torture them or to punish them. Yes, they are putting the knives or blades, and they putting the chili powder and using them, hanging the
chili powder.
Chili powder. Put them in the wounds.
Cut them open.
And put the chili powder in the wound, and hang the people upside down.
Hang people upside down.
Upside down.
What do they use? Knives or guns? Or
basically knives, baseball bat, cricket bat, those sort of equipments mainly, and axe sometimes.
When they fight each other, they use swords?
Yes, swords, axe.
Axe?
Yes, and knives, blades, that sort of. And also there are fish tail also in Sri Lanka used.
Fish tail?
Fish tail. One type of fish tail is in the like a barbed wire. There's a
barbs on it, and what they use for slashing.
Slashing, yes.
This is the sort of entertainment that has emerged from a culture where a civil war has raged for over 20 years. Violent Tamil films with bloody fight scenes.
Do you think that the violence that some of these kids have experienced back in Sri Lanka affects the way they behave when they come to the UK?
They came from the violent background. Their mind are in violent way, and they are not in quite ready to get into the community straight away. So they are affected mentally, because also some of them are in past they are also themselves as torture victims.
Oh, I don't know about you, but I found that quite surprising. Here we are in Manor Park, E12, and we've got kidnappings, torturing, wounds being opened and chili powder being poured into them. A little surprising.
But it's not just old feuds and squabbles that cross borders, bringing violence to the streets of our capital. London's cosmopolitan nature means that criminal groups from all over the world can find a home.
I think the main thing about London is that it is a major international city, and because so much of organised crime is based along these ethnic lines, whatever ethnicity you're from, whatever international gang you're based with, you can come to London and you can find a community that you can both exploit and hide among while you carry out your organised crime.
It's rare that organised crime reveals itself from behind London's windows and shop fronts. But I'd heard of one occasion when it emerged onto the streets for all to see.
Went away to a relatively quiet area of North London, but in 2002, a fracas over protection money resulted in a pitched battle between over 100 people from the Kurdish and Turkish communities. It resulted in death and multiple injuries.
This is Stoke Newington in North London. It's home to one of the world's largest displaced refugee communities. there are probably 20,000 Kurds living in London, most of them from a small region of eastern Turkey that Kurdish separatists refer to as Kurdistan. At the heart of this community is the Halkavi Welfare Centre. It's a community beset by a gang problem. Gangs like the Tottenham Boys, the Bombacillas and the Kurdish Bulldogs, associated with the 13 or so local mafioso-type crime families, deal in heroin and run local protection rackets. It's the task of Ibrahim, one of the community workers here, to prise young people away from the gang's grasp.
Some young members were trying to get out of those gangs, and they were coming into the centre saying that the result of us trying to get out of the centre is this: broken fingers, broken legs, being harshly beaten, being hospitalized, and their families being threatened. Young people being threatened with saying that we'll kill your family, we'll kill your mom, we'll kill your dad, we'll kill your sister, we'll kill your brother.
One evening in 2002, one of the shopkeepers stood up to the gangs when they came knocking for protection money. A fight broke out, which spilled out onto the streets and turned into a turf war between rival gangs for control of the clubs and shops in the area.
So I received a call as well from the police saying that hundreds of Kurds are fighting in Haringey.
Well, by the time I get to the Green Lanes, people were on the street shouting, beating each other, hundreds of people basically. Holding wooden things like chairs and broken chairs and etc. in their hands, shouting, saying that gangs out of Haringey, gangs out of Haringey.
There was this fighting and there was a lot of shootings and a lot of killed people. At that time, nobody knew how many men was killed.
When we just turned right, we came across two guys who had guns in their hands. I said, why? Why are you doing this? You're just like killing everyone. Your life is dying, your family is going, your people are having trouble in Haringey. Are we here for this as a community? Just like he didn't want to this, he said, shut up. And then he asked the other guy next to him, shoot him, he said. And then the guy next to him just pulled out his gun. He shot me. I didn't even realize that I was shot. I had a black trouser on me, black jean. I didn't notice any sort of blood on me. And a young boy, he was lying down on the floor. I said, what are you doing on the floor? He said, they throw a stone at me. When I touched him, he was all bleeding. I said, look, maybe you've been shot or something. Then he touched my trousers. He said, you've been shot too. And then we started to laugh, which is amazing. I mean, it was a very tragic thing for us, but we just laughed.
One man was killed, an innocent man. He was laying carpet that day. He was killed, and Ibrahim was shot. 3 other people were shot.
The bullet went through here and it came out of back. There are 2 holes. But I'm not that bad. I have to keep stretching my legs. I can't sit for long. I can't stand for long. So I have to keep changing positions. But, I mean, it could have been worse.
The man Ibrahim says is responsible for his shooting was released through lack of evidence. Police face an uphill struggle to crack many of these international mafia-style gangs.
London's a cosmopolitan city. It's got people, obviously, from all over the world. That makes links to organised criminality across the world. London, therefore, feeds a lot of the criminality. Difficulties of dealing with it are identifying the criminal groups involved, infiltrating those criminal groups because they may be recent arrivals to the UK. We may not have the language skills. We may not have the understanding of their cultures. So it's about us developing the intelligence picture about what's going on and then finding the best ways to tackle that.
Police show me footage of a passport forging factory. With the new criminal networks, even identifying who the criminals are proves difficult.
Someone who obtains a British passport in either their own name or in a false name can obviously change their identity. It allows them to be able to basically disappear from the face of, as far as official documents, etc. are concerned.
Police did manage to bust this group. They ran their forging factory in the front room of a house in Dagenham.
Each passport is sold for something between £2,000 to £4,000 per passport. That's a prepared passport ready to be used by the person that wishes to change their identity. make an awful lot of money from it, an awful lot of money very, very quickly.
This is how you can make that money. Illegal immigration. There are about 500,000 illegal immigrants in the UK, often trafficked in by criminal networks. In 2002, police set a surveillance team on the head of one such network, headed by Sarwan Singh Deo.
You see Deo with a wad of cash, counting the money out to give to one of his foot soldiers who's going to go abroad, meet with some illegal immigrants abroad in another country and fly them back to the UK. And that's Deo there handing over some money to be used as expenses for carrying out that facilitation.
I watched surveillance footage of the illegal immigrant coming in through passport control at Dover. Incredibly, he gets through with his forged passport. Even more incredibly, at Dover railway station some 20 minutes later, he hands his passport back to his handler to be recycled.
Coming all the way from India, they were being charged anything up to £8,000. We suspect that the organisation was bringing in hundreds per year, and if we multiply that by 12 years at a rough average of £5,000 per illegal immigrant, it's an awful lot of money. It runs into the millions.
While some illegal immigrants end up in factories doing low-paid jobs, others enter a more treacherous world. It's estimated that in London there are between 5,000 and 8,000 prostitutes, 80% of them non-British. Many of them victims of people traffickers and sold as sex slaves for a few £1,000s.
We have women who've been trafficked by very sophisticated networks, who've used false passports and false visas, and who clearly have involvement with the authorities in various countries, and who have travelled across Europe and never had any problems in terms of getting across borders. So those networks have been very sophisticated and quite large, it seems.
I listened to the testimony of one East European woman who was trafficked to the UK by an Albanian gang. Her terrifying story shows just how easy it is for these gangs to exploit women across borders. She is too traumatised to show her face.
Nobody don't care who I am, why I'm coming. Not ask about visa, not ask about document. I'm just straight away. After 1 week, I start understanding what happened with me. Nobody don't take me nice job, and just bring me for prostitution. This guy already pay for me. It's about £4,000. Yeah, I'm like a cow. Yeah. Just I'm giving not milk. Yeah, just for money. He hit me and commanded me and used me to take the stick and I cut you in small pieces, and flush in the toilet, and never not cry about you.
She's safe now, but her story is by no means unique. In the future, there will be even more stories like hers.
If you look at the world population and where it's growing fastest over the next few years in the places where the world is the poorest, which means the people there have the most reason to want to leave and go somewhere where they can make more money. So what it means is that for the people traffickers, there's an ever-growing number of people who they can actually bring to one place. And with drugs, once you smuggle them into the country, you then got to find buyers, you've got to sort of distribute them and sell them. With people, once you brought them in, for a start they pay in advance, then once you've got them here, you just let them go, and that's it, your work is done.
It's been an eye-opening journey for me. London's a city that I thought I knew well, but it's a city in constant flux, and its crime is changing with it.
We've all seen changes in communications technology, the internet, travel's become easier, access to forged documentation has become easier, which means that organised criminals feel able to travel fairly anonymously across the world. So it's those sort of international dimensions which have clearly made a big change to the way organised crime's changed and flourished.
But what perhaps won't change is the loyalty and trust that gangs and criminal groups need to survive, or the price to be paid when a gang falls apart and that trust breaks down.
If you're a proper villain, you can never retire because you've made too many enemies. Joe Public can answer the front door. If there's a knock on, I can never ever do that. You know, I regret that. Joe Public, if there's a knock on his door, he can open the latch up and say, yeah, can I help you? I can never, ever, ever, for as long as I live, answer my front door.
From my travels, I have learned that gangs reflect the nature of the cities in which they operate. What's striking about London, perhaps more than some of the other places I've visited, is the speed at which gangs proliferate. In this city where 7 million of us live, gang crime is getting worse.
Next on Sky One.
At a younger age, I was just basically greedy.
Richard Hammond takes a scientific look inside Britain's fattest man. While tomorrow at 10, Sky One documents the life of a British fashion icon.
Can you not tell me?
And reveals the footage that caused a media frenzy.
Chosen.